I stepped into the dimly lit Target store, its automatic doors sliding shut behind me with a mechanical hiss. The overhead lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the deserted aisles. My heart quickened as I realized that I was alone in this massive, labyrinthine store. As I ventured deeper into the store, I heard faint whispers, like ghostly voices, echoing through the aisles. Goosebumps erupted on my arms, and I shivered despite the oppressive warmth of the building. The whispers grew louder, taunting me with words I couldn't quite make out. It felt like the store itself was alive, breathing and murmuring secrets. I turned a corner and froze. Standing in the middle of an aisle was a mannequin, dressed in a tattered red dress. Its face was a grotesque mask of twisted plastic, frozen in an eternal scream. I swallowed hard and took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest. A sudden gust of cold air enveloped me, making me gasp. The mannequin's head turned slowly to meet my gaze. It shouldn't have been possible, but its lifeless eyes bore into mine, filled with malevolence. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I tried to leave, but the exit doors refused to open. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped. I turned to face the mannequin, and its lips curled into a sinister smile. The whispers in the air grew louder, forming chilling words that spoke of torment and despair. Desperate, I ran deeper into the store, searching for another way out. The aisles seemed to stretch on endlessly, leading me in circles. The mannequins multiplied, their twisted faces all staring at me, mocking me. Each step I took felt like an eternity, my fear mounting with every passing moment. I stumbled upon a section of the store that was unlike any other. It was a nightmarish carnival of horrors, with shelves filled with grotesque dolls, each one more disturbing than the last. Their eyes followed me, and their porcelain faces contorted in silent agony. In the center of this surreal nightmare stood a carousel, its eerie music playing in a haunting melody. The carousel was adorned with horses that seemed to writhe in agony, their eyes filled with dread. I had no choice but to climb onto one of the horses and hold on for dear life. The carousel began to spin, faster and faster, as the music grew louder and more dissonant. I screamed, my voice drowned out by the cacophony. The world around me blurred, and I felt myself being pulled into a vortex of terror. Suddenly, the carousel stopped, and I was thrown to the ground. Gasping for breath, I looked up and saw a figure standing before me. It was a tall, shadowy figure, cloaked in darkness. Its eyes were two burning orbs of malevolence. "Welcome to Target," it whispered, its voice a sinister chorus of the whispers that had haunted me. "You're here forever now." I tried to flee, but the figure reached out and grabbed my arm with a grip that felt like icy chains. It dragged me toward a gaping black void that had appeared in the aisle. I screamed, but my cries were swallowed by the darkness as I was pulled into its depths. And then, everything went silent. I found myself alone in the pitch-black void, trapped in an endless abyss of nothingness. The whispers had ceased, the mannequins and grotesque dolls were gone, and the shadowy figure had disappeared. I don't know how long I've been here, in this horrifying purgatory that was once a Target store. Time has lost all meaning, and I am left with only the memories of that nightmarish encounter. I have come to accept that I will never escape this twisted, haunted place. So, if you ever find yourself near an abandoned Target store, stay far away. For within its walls, a malevolent darkness waits, ready to ensnare anyone who dares to enter, and it will never let you go. I'll never forget that fateful night at Buffalo Wild. It started off like any other evening, a gathering with friends for some beer and wings. The dimly lit sports bar had always been our go-to spot for a good time. Little did we know, that night would be far from ordinary. As we settled into our booth, the atmosphere seemed off. The air was thick with an unexplainable tension. The usual chatter and laughter were replaced by an eerie silence that sent shivers down my spine. I dismissed it as my imagination running wild, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. We ordered our usual, a basket of spicy wings and a round of cold beers. The waitress, a young woman with a blank expression, brought our order promptly. Her eyes had a distant, haunted look as if she had seen something unspeakable. She didn't say a word, just set our food and drinks down and walked away, disappearing into the dimly lit depths of the restaurant. As we dug into our wings, we couldn't help but notice the strange behavior of the other patrons. They seemed entranced by the giant wall of TVs broadcasting various sports events. Their eyes were glued to the screens, but their faces were devoid of emotion. It was as if they were in a trance, unable to tear their gaze away from the flickering images. I decided to investigate further, excusing myself from the table to use the restroom. The hallway leading to the restrooms was unusually long and narrow, and the dim lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Inside the restroom, I splashed cold water on my face, trying to calm my nerves. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, like a soft breeze rustling through dry leaves. It seemed to be coming from one of the stalls. I approached cautiously and pushed open the door. What I saw froze my blood. There, in the dimly lit stall, was a figure hunched over, whispering incoherent words in a language I couldn't understand. The air was thick with an otherworldly chill, and a foul stench filled the cramped space. I stumbled back in horror, slamming the stall door shut. Whatever that thing was, it was no human. I rushed back to my friends, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to explain what I had seen, but they dismissed it as a joke. The strange atmosphere in the restaurant had intensified, and it was clear that something was terribly wrong. As the night wore on, things only got worse. The TVs on the walls began to glitch, displaying distorted images of horrifying creatures and nightmarish landscapes. The patrons, still entranced, stared at the screens with vacant eyes. Panic began to spread among the remaining customers, but the staff seemed unfazed, as if they were part of some twisted ritual. Desperation took hold of us. We needed to escape this nightmare. I made a bold move and approached the waitress who had served us earlier. Her vacant eyes met mine, and I asked her if there was a way out. She nodded, her movements slow and robotic, and pointed to a narrow door at the back of the restaurant. We made a run for it, leaving behind the surreal madness of Buffalo Wild. As we burst through the door, we found ourselves in a dark alleyway, far from the bizarre scene inside. We ran for what felt like hours, not looking back, until we reached the safety of our homes. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night at Buffalo Wild. It was a place of leisure turned into a realm of unspeakable horror. I've never returned, and I don't think I ever will. The memory of that night still haunts my dreams, a reminder that sometimes, even the most familiar places can hide unimaginable terrors. I remember that chilling night like it was yesterday. The rain poured in torrents, and the thunder rumbled ominously in the distance as I pulled my coat tighter around me. I had just finished my late-night shift at the grocery store, and all I wanted was to get home and escape the relentless storm. Little did I know, that night would be etched into my memory forever. The old grocery store, located on the outskirts of town, had always been a bit eerie. Its dimly lit aisles and creaky floors gave it a haunted feel, even on the sunniest days. But that night, something was different. As I locked up the store, I could have sworn I heard faint whispers echoing through the empty aisles. My heart raced, but I chalked it up to my tired mind playing tricks on me. I walked briskly towards my car, the rain soaking me to the bone. Just as I reached for the door handle, a loud crash echoed from inside the store. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest, and peered through the rain-smeared window. What I saw made my blood run cold. Shadows moved within the store, twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. Shelves rattled, and products flew off them as if thrown by an invisible force. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my phone to dial 911. But when I glanced up again, the store was silent and still, as though nothing had happened. My trembling hands struggled to unlock the car, and I quickly jumped inside, my heart still racing. As I peeled out of the parking lot, my headlights illuminated a figure standing at the store's entrance. It was a woman, drenched from head to toe, with long, tangled hair obscuring her face. I couldn't make out her features, but her presence sent a shiver down my spine. I sped away, convinced that I had left behind a scene of chaos and madness. But when I checked the rearview mirror, the grocery store appeared untouched, as if the supernatural disturbance had never occurred. Confusion gnawed at my thoughts, but my primary concern was getting as far away from that place as possible. As I drove through the torrential rain, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It was then that my phone rang, startling me. I answered, and a voice on the other end sent chills down my spine. "Come back," the voice whispered, a sinister undertone sending shivers through my body. It was a voice I couldn't place, and it seemed to emanate from all directions. I hung up, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, and tried to focus on getting home. But no matter how far I drove, the road seemed to stretch on endlessly. The rain pounded relentlessly, and the darkness outside grew more oppressive with each passing mile. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, that something malevolent was following me. I finally spotted a gas station up ahead and pulled in, hoping to find safety and solace. But as I stepped out of my car, the same eerie presence washed over me. The store's lights flickered, and the gas pumps groaned as if possessed. Desperation overcame me, and I sprinted inside, seeking refuge. The gas station attendant eyed me warily as I stumbled in, my clothes soaked, and my face pale. I tried to explain what had happened, but he simply shook his head, saying, "You're not the first person to experience strange things around here." He pointed to a wall of newspaper clippings, each detailing bizarre occurrences at the grocery store. People had reported hearing voices, seeing apparitions, and witnessing unexplainable phenomena. One headline read, "The Haunting of the Abandoned Store." My heart sank as I realized I was not alone in my terrifying encounter. Whatever malevolent force resided in that grocery store had been tormenting people for years, and I had unwittingly become its latest victim. As I sat in the gas station, the rain continued to pour outside, and the thunder rumbled ominously. I knew I couldn't stay there forever, but I also couldn't bring myself to return to that cursed place. The grocery store had become a nightmare I couldn't escape, and I feared that it would haunt me for the rest of my days. I'm stranded on a desolate stretch of road, surrounded by darkness and the ominous whisper of the wind through the trees. My car's engine sputtered to a halt, leaving me utterly alone in this eerie silence. With a sinking feeling in my gut, I knew that I had no choice but to attempt a car repair myself. I popped the hood, my trembling hands illuminated by the faint glow of my phone's flashlight. The engine bay seemed like a crypt, shrouded in shadows and filled with strange, mechanical monsters that I had no hope of understanding. Despite my lack of expertise, I couldn't just sit there, waiting for help that might never come. As I peered into the abyss, a rustling sound emanated from the nearby woods. My heart raced, and my imagination conjured up all sorts of horrors lurking in the trees. I dismissed it as my mind playing tricks, but the unease persisted. I grabbed my toolbox and awkwardly began poking around the engine, hoping to stumble upon the source of the problem. The eerie silence of the night was broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl, as if nature itself were conspiring against me. It felt like I was working in a void, disconnected from the rest of the world. Then, out of nowhere, the headlights of a passing car illuminated the road, revealing a figure standing by the tree line. I couldn't make out their face, but their silhouette sent chills down my spine. They were watching me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that their presence was malevolent. Ignoring the stranger, I continued my futile attempts at car repair. Sweat mingled with the dirt on my hands as I fumbled with wires and pipes. Suddenly, The engine roared to life, its growl echoing through the night. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Just as I was about to close the hood, I heard a low, guttural growl, not from the engine, but from behind me. I turned, my flashlight trembling, and there, in the darkness, stood a creature that defied explanation. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent crimson, and its elongated limbs contorted in unnatural ways. I froze, unable to comprehend the horror before me. With a surge of adrenaline, I slammed the hood shut and scrambled into the driver's seat. My heart pounded in my chest as I desperately tried to start the car, but the engine remained silent, as if it had never come back to life. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and the creature was gone, leaving me to wonder if it had ever been there at all. Just then, the headlights of another car pierced the darkness, and a tow truck pulled up behind me. The driver, a grizzled man with a weathered face, looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. "You're lucky I came along when I did," he said, as he hooked my car to his tow truck. I nodded, still shaken by the encounter with the inexplicable creature. I didn't dare speak of it to the tow truck driver, he wouldn't have believed me anyway. As we drove away from the desolate road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something otherworldly had been watching and toying with me that night, as if the car repair itself had been a macabre game. I cautiously approached the decrepit house, clutching the mop tightly in my trembling hand. The air hung heavy with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the creaking of the ancient wooden floors beneath my feet. The windows, obscured by layers of grime, seemed to stare back at me like hollow eyes. As I ventured deeper into the dimly lit interior, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The walls bore witness to years of neglect, their once vibrant colors faded into a sickly, moldy hue. Cobwebs clung to the corners of the ceiling, swaying gently in a phantom breeze. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached the first room, a disheveled living area frozen in time. A cold breeze swept through the room, causing the tattered curtains to sway ominously. I forced myself to focus on the task at hand and began to sweep the dust and debris into a dustpan. That's when I heard it, a faint, echoing whisper that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. I froze, mop in hand, straining to make out the words. It was as though the house itself was trying to communicate with me, but the words remained elusive, lost in a sea of eerie murmurs. Shivers ran down my spine as I continued to clean, my every movement met with a sinister resistance. The mop handle seemed to twitch in my grip, as though it had a mind of its own. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, but the unease in the pit of my stomach grew. Moving to the kitchen, I found a sink overflowing with murky water, dishes coated in layers of mold and decay. I swallowed hard and turned on the tap, only to be greeted by a sudden torrent of blood-red water. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, dropping the mop. The walls seemed to close in on me as I made my way up the creaking staircase, each step groaning in protest. The upstairs hallway was lined with a series of locked doors, their handles rusted shut. I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lurked behind them, something that had been trapped for far too long. I approached the final room, my heart pounding in my ears. The door was ajar, revealing a pitch-black void within. I hesitated for a moment before pushing it open, revealing a room bathed in an otherworldly glow. In the center of the room, a spectral figure hovered, its eyes hollow and vacant. I couldn't tear my gaze away as the figure slowly turned to face me, its lips parting to emit a blood-curdling scream that seemed to reverberate through my very soul. I stumbled back, falling to the floor in a frenzy of fear. The room began to twist and contort, the walls closing in on me as though they were alive. Shadows danced on the walls, taking on grotesque forms that seemed to mock my terror. I crawled backward, desperate to escape the nightmare that had consumed the house. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, I heard a voice, a real voice, calling my name. It was my friend, Mark, who had come to check on me after I failed to respond to his calls and texts. He burst through the front door, breaking the malevolent spell that had held me captive. As I stumbled out of the house, gasping for air, I glanced back one last time. The house now stood still and lifeless, as though it had never been anything more than a decrepit old building. But the memory of the horrors I had witnessed would haunt me forever, a chilling reminder that some places should never be cleaned, for they hide secrets too terrible to imagine. I couldn't believe my luck when I landed the night shift job at the old, decrepit mental asylum. They called it St. Mary's Sanitarium, but the locals had a different name for it, the Devil's Den. It was said to be haunted, and I laughed off such superstitious nonsense. Little did I know, my nights at St. Mary's would become a descent into unimaginable horror. On my very first night, I was greeted by the eerie silence that enveloped the place. The fluorescent lights cast long, ghastly shadows along the never-ending hallways, and the air felt unnaturally cold, even for a late autumn night. I settled into my desk, determined to make the most of this quiet job. Hours crept by as I stared at the security monitors, each camera showing a different part of the asylum. The place was massive, with a labyrinth of halls and rooms. Occasionally, I'd see flickers of movement, but I brushed them off as tricks of the dim lighting. I was a skeptic, after all. Around 3 a.m., I heard it, a faint, distant whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. My heart raced, and I clenched my fists, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But then, the whisper grew louder, as if someone was right behind me, breathing words I couldn't understand. Terrified, I turned to the nearest camera feed, and that's when I saw her. A young woman in a tattered white gown, her hair hanging over her face like a curtain. She was standing in the hallway, just outside the security room. Panic set in as I watched her slowly lift her head, revealing a face twisted into a grotesque, contorted smile. I froze, unable to move as the woman's hollow eyes locked onto mine through the camera. She whispered something that felt like it clawed at the very depths of my soul. It was then that I realized the chilling truth. I was not alone in St. Mary's. Summoning every ounce of courage, I rushed out of the security room and into the dimly lit corridor, determined to confront the woman. But when I reached the spot where she had been, there was nothing there. Just the cold, oppressive silence. I continued my rounds, my footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. It seemed like the asylum was playing tricks on me, doors opening and closing on their own, strange apparitions flickering in the corners of my vision. My skepticism was shattered, replaced by a paralyzing fear that I couldn't shake. As the night wore on, I heard more whispers, more unintelligible words that seemed to come from the very walls. I followed them, guided by an irresistible force, deeper into the labyrinthine asylum. Each step took me further from sanity and deeper into the heart of darkness. Finally, I reached a room that seemed to pulse with malevolence. The door creaked open, revealing a chamber bathed in an otherworldly, sickly green light. And there she was again, the woman in white, but this time she was surrounded by a group of otherworldly figures, their faces twisted in agony. I watched in horror as they danced and writhed, their movements unnatural and grotesque. The woman's voice, now louder and more sinister, led the horrific ritual. It was as if I had stumbled upon some unholy congregation of the damned. I tried to turn and run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The whispers grew into a deafening cacophony, a maddening chorus of torment. The figures advanced toward me, their eyes filled with hunger, and I knew then that there was no escape. In that moment, I understood the true nature of St. Mary's Sanitarium. It was a place where the boundary between the living and the dead had blurred, where the horrors of the past clung to the present. I was just another hapless soul drawn into its nightmarish grip, destined to join the wailing specters that haunted its halls. And as the maddening whispers consumed me, I couldn't help but wonder if the Devil's Den was an apt name for this forsaken place. The horror of that night shift at St. Mary's would haunt me forever, a chilling reminder that some nightmares are all too real. I've always had a fascination with the supernatural, the eerie, and the unexplained. It's a fascination that led me to explore abandoned buildings, visit haunted houses, and, one fateful evening, venture into the strangest bowling alley I'd ever encountered. It was a gloomy autumn night when I heard about the Whispering Pins Bowling Alley. The name alone sent shivers down my spine, but I couldn't resist the allure of its chilling reputation. Stories of pins that moved on their own, ghostly whispers in the dark, and the unshakable feeling of being watched had piqued my curiosity to the point of obsession. My friends, Mike and Lisa, were equally intrigued. We decided to embark on this eerie adventure together. The alley was located on the outskirts of town, hidden amidst a thicket of gnarled trees. Its rusty sign creaked ominously in the wind as we approached, and the flickering neon lights cast eerie shadows on the desolate parking lot. As we entered, a musty scent hung in the air, and the dimly lit interior revealed an antiquated bowling alley frozen in time. The lanes were ancient, the wood chipped and warped, and the pins, despite their age, appeared surprisingly well maintained. An elderly man with a long white beard sat behind the counter, his eyes a watery blue that seemed to pierce through the very depths of our souls. 3 games, please, I said, my voice quivering slightly as I handed him some cash. He nodded and handed us 3 pairs of worn-out bowling shoes. They felt oddly cold and damp, but we didn't dwell on it, eager to begin our adventure. We took our places at lane 13, an ominous choice in hindsight. The alley was empty, and an unsettling silence enveloped us as we prepared to bowl. I picked up the heavy ball, my heart pounding in anticipation. As I released it, I could swear I heard a faint, ghostly sigh, but I dismissed it as my imagination. Our first game was uneventful, but as the night wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly eerie. The pins seemed to move of their own accord, their plastic bodies swaying and tilting, defying the laws of physics. Mike and Lisa exchanged nervous glances, and I could feel the tension in the air. During our second game, we began to hear whispers, faint and incomprehensible at first, but growing steadily louder. It was as if the very walls of the alley were murmuring secrets long forgotten. We tried to ignore them, focusing on our game, but the whispers continued to haunt us. Then, as Lisa prepared to take her turn, something inexplicable occurred. Her ball veered sharply to the left, defying the laws of gravity, and crashed into the wall, leaving a deep dent. Lisa screamed, and I rushed to her side, my heart racing. "We need to get out of here," Mike insisted, his voice trembling. But before we could make our escape, the lights in the alley flickered and went out, plunging us into pitch darkness. Panic set in as we fumbled for our phones to use as flashlights. In the dim glow of our screens, we saw something that will forever haunt our nightmares. The pins, no longer content with their subtle movements, were now floating in the air, arranged in a sinister formation. They hung there, suspended in defiance of gravity, and their ghostly whispers grew deafening. It was as if they were mocking us, playing a malevolent game of their own. With trembling hands, we made our way to the exit, but the door refused to budge. It was as if an unseen force held it shut, trapping us inside with the malevolent pins. Panic turned to terror as we realized the extent of our predicament. Desperate, we turned to the old man at the counter, but he was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving us alone with the malevolent spirits that now controlled the bowling alley. Hours passed, our futile attempts to escape proving fruitless. The pins continued their eerie dance, and the whispers grew louder, filling our minds with incomprehensible dread. We were trapped in a nightmare, a twisted game orchestrated by forces beyond our understanding. As dawn broke, the lights flickered back to life, and the door swung open as if by its own accord. We stumbled out of the Whispering Pins bowling alley, our bodies and minds scarred by the horrors we had witnessed. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. Was it a malevolent force lurking in the alley, or had our obsession with the supernatural driven us to madness? One thing is certain. I will never forget the haunting whispers and the spectral pins that defied the laws of reality in that cursed bowling alley. It's a nightmarish experience that continues to haunt my dreams, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are best left unexplored. It was a chilly autumn evening when I found myself standing outside the familiar red and white facade of our local Chick-fil-A. The restaurant was usually a haven of comfort, with its friendly staff and mouth-watering chicken sandwiches. But tonight, something felt terribly wrong. The fluorescent lights inside flickered ominously as I stepped through the door, sending shivers down my spine. The usual hum of conversation and clinking cutlery had been replaced by an eerie silence. Not a single patron was in sight, and the employees behind the counter seemed frozen, their smiles forced and unconvincing. "Welcome to Chick-fil-A," one of the employees monotoned. Her eyes seemed vacant, as if the life had been drained from them. "How may I serve you today?" I hesitated for a moment, my stomach churning with unease. "I'll have a Chick-fil-A sandwich, please," I stammered. She nodded mechanically and began to prepare my order, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly amiss. I glanced around the dimly lit restaurant, and that's when I noticed it. The walls were adorned with strange, unsettling paintings. Each painting depicted a cow, the Chick-fil-A mascot, but these cows were different. They had bloodshot eyes and sinister grins, holding signs that read, "Eat more humans," in dripping, crimson letters. My heart raced as I realized that there was something seriously wrong with this place. I took my sandwich and hurried to a corner booth, hoping to eat quickly and escape this nightmarish Chick-fil-A. But as I bit into the sandwich, the taste was off. It was as if the chicken had turned rancid, and a metallic tang lingered in my mouth. I gagged and spit it out, horrified. Panicking, I looked around and saw that the other patrons who had entered after me were now devouring their food with ravenous intensity. Their eyes were vacant, just like the employees, and they chewed mechanically as if in a trance. I felt a wave of terror wash over me as I realized that something sinister was controlling them. Desperation overcame me as I rushed towards the exit, but the door was inexplicably locked. I pounded on the glass, screaming for help, but no one outside seemed to hear or notice my plight. I was trapped in this hellish Chick-fil-A. I turned back to the restaurant and saw the employees advancing toward me, their empty eyes fixed on me with malevolent intent. The cow paintings on the walls seemed to come to life, their grotesque grins widening as they watched the unfolding horror. In a last-ditch effort to escape, I ran into the kitchen, hoping to find a way out. But what I found there was even more nightmarish. The kitchen was filled with rows of cages, each containing a live chicken. These chickens were unlike any I had ever seen. Their feathers were matted with blood, and they let out agonized cries as they pecked at the bars of their cages. Suddenly, I realized the horrifying truth. Chick-fil-A was not serving chicken sandwiches made from poultry. They were serving sandwiches made from people. The grotesque secret of this restaurant had been unveiled, and I was trapped in a nightmare beyond comprehension. I had to find a way out, to escape from this place of unspeakable horror. As I frantically searched for an exit, I heard the unholy chant of the employees and patrons behind me, their voices twisted into a chilling chorus of, "Eat more humans, eat more humans." The walls seemed to close in on me as I raced through the labyrinthine kitchen, desperately seeking an escape route. It felt like hours had passed, but the hellish Chick-fil-A had no intention of letting me go. Just as hope began to fade, I stumbled upon a narrow service corridor that led to a heavy metal door. With trembling hands, I pushed it open and emerged into the cool night air, gasping for breath. I had escaped the clutches of Chick-fil-A, but the horrors I had witnessed would haunt me forever. As I looked back at the restaurant, I knew that the world needed to know the truth about this place. I would tell my story, expose the nightmarish reality hidden behind those cheerful red and white walls, and ensure that Chick-fil-A's dark secret would never be forgotten. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the sinister cows and their gruesome message still lurked in the shadows, waiting for their next unsuspecting victim. The nightmare of Chick-fil-A was far from over. The fluorescent lights above buzzed incessantly, casting eerie shadows along the cold, gray hallway. I huddled with my classmates, the taste of fear lingering on my lips. The intercom crackled to life, and Principal Anderson's voice trembled with anxiety as he announced the lockdown. "Attention, students and staff," he stammered, "this is not a drill. Lockdown procedures are now in effect. Please remain quiet and in your classrooms." The sudden seriousness in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. I exchanged worried glances with my friends, Sarah and Mark. We knew this was no ordinary lockdown. Minutes felt like hours as we sat in the dimly lit classroom, the tension in the air palpable. We whispered about the rumors that had been circulating lately, the strange disappearances, the unsettling sightings in the woods behind the school, and the inexplicable markings found on the lockers. It was as if our school had become a breeding ground for something otherworldly. A loud bang echoed through the hallway, followed by a bone-chilling scraping sound. I felt my heart race, my palms sweaty. Mark clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. Sarah's eyes widened with terror as we heard something moving closer. The intercom crackled again, but this time it wasn't Principal Anderson's voice. It was something guttural, inhuman, a voice that sent shivers down my spine. "You can't hide, little ones," it hissed. Panic surged through me as I realized the source of the voice was just outside our classroom door. Whatever it was, it knew we were here. Sarah stifled a sob, and Mark held his breath, his face contorted with fear. The doorknob rattled violently, and my heart pounded in my chest. We watched in terror as the door slowly swung open, revealing a creature unlike anything we had ever seen. Its skin was ashen gray, stretched taut over a skeletal frame. Its eyes, devoid of any humanity, glowed with an otherworldly light. I could hear Sarah whimpering, and Mark's trembling breaths filled the room. The creature took a slow, deliberate step toward us, and a foul odor filled the air, like rotting flesh and decay. It was a smell I would never forget. In that moment, instinct kicked in. I grabbed Sarah's hand and motioned for Mark to follow as we bolted from the room. We ran through the darkened hallways, the creature's eerie laughter echoing behind us. It seemed to take pleasure in our fear, feeding off it like a predator stalking its prey. We stumbled into the gymnasium, where other students had gathered. They, too, had seen the horrors lurking in the shadows. Our eyes met, a silent understanding passing between us. We had to find a way to survive this nightmare together. As we huddled in the gym, the lights flickered, and the temperature dropped to an icy chill. The intercom crackled to life once more, but this time it was Principal Anderson's voice, strained and desperate. "Students, stay in the gymnasium," he pleaded. "We've called for help. Just hold on a little longer." But hope felt like a distant memory as the creature's voice returned, mocking Principal Anderson's words. "Help won't save you," it taunted. Hours passed, and the creature continued to torment us, its malevolent presence growing stronger. We clung to one another, our fear and desperation binding us together. We were trapped, with no way out, and the horrors of that high school lockdown would haunt our nightmares for the rest of our lives. The wind whispered through the trees, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls of my dimly lit room. I lay there, wide awake, unable to escape the clutches of insomnia that seemed to grip me tighter with every passing hour. The clock on my nightstand read 2:37 a.m., and the house was as still as a graveyard. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off tonight. Perhaps it was the unusually cold breeze that crept in through the cracked window, or maybe it was the incessant creaking of the old house settling. But deep down, I knew it was something more sinister. I tried to calm my racing heart by telling myself it was just my overactive imagination. I had always been a bit of a scaredy cat, and being alone at night had never been my strong suit. My rational mind tried to dismiss the unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach, but the irrational part of me knew better. I decided to get out of bed and make myself a cup of tea, hoping it would soothe my nerves. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight as I made my way to the kitchen. Each creak seemed to echo through the empty house, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. As I waited for the kettle to boil, I peered out the window into the backyard. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie silver glow on the barren trees. That's when I saw it, a figure, tall and shadowy, standing just beyond the reach of the moonlight. My heart leapt into my throat, and I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair in my haste to escape the window. The figure remained still, its silhouette unmoving in the darkness. I knew I had to call the police, but the phone was in my bedroom, and I couldn't bring myself to go back there. I was paralyzed by fear, unable to tear my eyes away from the ominous presence outside. Minutes felt like hours as I watched the figure, unable to make out any details in the shroud of darkness. It was as though the night itself had given birth to this menacing entity. And then, with a sudden jolt, it vanished into thin air, leaving me trembling and bewildered. I mustered the courage to retreat to my bedroom, where I locked the door and called the police. I tried to explain what I had seen, but the words came out in stuttered fragments. They assured me that an officer would be dispatched to check on the property. I sat on my bed, clutching the phone tightly, waiting for help to arrive. The minutes dragged on, and the oppressive silence in the house grew heavier. Just as I was beginning to doubt my own sanity, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the closet. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it sent shivers down my spine. I crept toward the closet, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. With a deep breath, I swung the door open, and there, in the darkness, was the figure. Its eyes, gleaming with an otherworldly malevolence, met mine, and a guttural growl escaped its twisted, contorted lips. I slammed the closet door shut and locked it, my heart pounding in my chest. Whatever that thing was, it was not human. It was a creature born of nightmares, and it was in my home, lurking in the shadows. The police arrived soon after, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness. They searched every inch of the house but found nothing. No trace of the figure, no signs of forced entry, nothing to explain the terror that had gripped me that night. As the officers left, they told me it was probably just a case of nerves, that my imagination had run wild in the dead of night. But I knew what I had seen was real, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting in the darkness for the next lonely soul to cross its path. I never slept peacefully again, haunted by the memory of that night and the knowledge that something malevolent lurked in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the light. Alone at night, I was never truly alone, for the darkness held secrets I could never comprehend. And so, I remain a prisoner in my own home, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurs, and where the horrors of the night never truly fade away.
Hi guys, thank you so much for watching, and if you like my horror sounds, please make sure to like and subscribe if you want to. See you in the next video. Bye!
The night had settled in, and a dense fog blanketed the small, isolated town where I lived. My name is Alex, and this is the story of the scariest night of my life. I had just moved into an old, creaky house on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place that sent shivers down your spine just by looking at it. The windows were broken, and the yard was overgrown with weeds that seemed to reach out and grab at you as you walked by. But it was all I could afford, and I was desperate for a fresh start. As I unpacked my belongings, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I chalked it up to nerves and exhaustion from the move. Night fell, and the wind outside howled like a tormented soul. I settled into bed, hoping to get a good night's sleep, but sleep eluded me that night. The strange noises grew louder, echoing through the house. It sounded like whispers, soft and sinister, right outside my bedroom door. With trembling hands, I mustered the courage to open the door, but the hallway was empty. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting my fear get the best of me. I returned to bed, determined to ignore the eerie sounds. But as the night wore on, things got even stranger. The room grew colder, and I could see my breath in the air. Shadows danced on the walls, taking on grotesque shapes. I pulled the covers tight around me, praying for morning to come soon. Then, I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, moving closer and closer to my bedroom. Panic coursed through me as I realized there was no one else in the house. I had locked all the doors and windows before going to bed. The door to my room slowly creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. I strained my eyes, trying to make out any shapes, but there was nothing to see. Fear gripped me like a vice, paralyzing me. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a tall, gaunt man with sunken eyes that gleamed with malevolence. His skin was pallid, and his clothes were tattered and stained. He moved closer, his breath raspy and labored. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was trapped in my own terror. He spoke in a whisper, a voice that sent chills down my spine. "You shouldn't have come here," he hissed. "This house belongs to me, and you are not welcome." I finally found my voice, stammering, "Who are you? What do you want?" He chuckled, a sound that made my blood run cold. "I am the darkness that dwells in this place, the malevolence that haunts these walls. I want nothing more than to watch you suffer." With that, he lunged at me, his bony fingers wrapping around my throat. I gasped for air, clawing at his hands, but it was no use. The room spun, and my vision faded to black. When I awoke, it was morning, and the sun's rays streamed through the windows. I was alone in my room, safe and unharmed. It felt like a twisted dream, a nightmare that had come to life. But as I got out of bed and made my way downstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The house felt different, as if it had absorbed the darkness from the night before. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed my belongings and left that accursed house behind, never looking back. I don't know who or what that sinister presence was, but one thing was certain. I had experienced the scariest night of my life, and I would never forget the terror that had gripped me in that haunted place. I had always been drawn to the eerie and mysterious. It's no surprise that when I heard about the Museum of Shadows, I couldn't resist the temptation to visit. The locals whispered about it, calling it the Museum of Curses, or the House of Haunts. They said it was a place where the darkest artifacts from history rested, each one carrying a sinister tale of death and despair. One gloomy autumn evening, I decided to venture into the heart of the city to find this infamous museum. Its location was shrouded in secrecy, as if it were meant to be hidden from the prying eyes of the curious. I asked a few people for directions, and their faces grew pale as they reluctantly pointed me in the right direction. The Museum of Shadows stood at the end of a narrow, dimly lit alley. Its facade was old and foreboding, with vines creeping up the walls as if trying to reclaim it from the world of the living. The sign above the entrance was barely visible, covered in grime and weathered by time. As I stepped inside, a chill ran down my spine, and I couldn't help but feel like an intruder in this place. The museum's interior was a labyrinth of dimly lit corridors, each one leading to a different exhibit of macabre artifacts. The air was heavy with the scent of aged wood and dust. I began my journey with a sense of trepidation, not knowing what horrors awaited me. My first encounter was with a cursed mirror. Legend had it that anyone who gazed into it would see their darkest fears come to life. As I peered into the mirror, I saw grotesque figures emerging from the shadows, their eyes filled with malice. I quickly averted my gaze, but the image remained burned into my mind. Moving deeper into the museum, I stumbled upon a room filled with ancient dolls. They were porcelain beauties with hollow eyes that seemed to follow me wherever I went. As I examined them, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned, but there was no one there. The dolls, whispers filled the room, their voices a haunting chorus of forgotten souls. The next exhibit was a collection of cursed jewelry. As I reached out to touch a necklace adorned with a blood-red gemstone, I felt a searing pain in my hand. I recoiled in horror, realizing that the jewelry had burned a mark into my skin. The pain was intense, but it was nothing compared to the terror that awaited me. I ventured deeper into the museum, my heart pounding in my chest. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the shadows danced with malevolence. In a dimly lit chamber, I encountered a painting that seemed to come alive. The figures in the painting whispered to me, their voices a cacophony of agony. I could feel their pain, their despair, and their anger consuming me. As I tried to leave the room, the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in the darkness. Panic set in as I fumbled for an escape. The walls seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, and I knew I was not alone. In the dim light, I saw the figures from the painting materialize before me, their twisted faces contorted in agony. I screamed as they reached out for me, their ghostly hands passing through my body. Their anguished cries filled the air, and I felt a crushing weight on my chest. It was as if the very essence of their torment was trying to consume me. With every ounce of strength, I managed to break free and stumble out of the room. I ran through the museum's labyrinthine corridors, each step echoing with the whispers of the damned. Finally, I burst out into the alley, gasping for breath and covered in sweat. The Museum of Shadows had exacted a toll on my soul, and I knew I would never be the same. The darkness of that place clung to me, a curse that I would carry with me for the rest of my days. I had ventured into the heart of horror, and I had barely escaped with my life. As I walked away from that accursed museum, I couldn't help but wonder if it was all real or merely a manifestation of my darkest fears. But one thing was certain. The Museum of Shadows was a place where nightmares came to life, and it was a place I would never forget.
Hi guys, thank you so much for watching.
The wind howled through the trees as our school bus rumbled to a stop in front of an old, decrepit mansion. My classmates and I exchanged nervous glances. We were on a field trip to explore the infamous Thornbrook Manor, a place that had been the subject of countless ghost stories and urban legends. As we stepped off the bus, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this place. Our teacher, Mrs. Anderson, led the way as we entered the mansion. Cobwebs hung in every corner, and the air was thick with a musty odor. The place seemed frozen in time, as if the world had forgotten it existed. "Stay together, everyone," Mrs. Anderson instructed, her voice trembling slightly. "And remember, no touching anything." We wandered through the dark, dusty rooms, our flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. The wooden floors creaked beneath our feet, and the walls seemed to whisper secrets long kept hidden. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we explored deeper into the mansion, I heard faint, ghostly whispers that sent shivers down my spine. My friend Sarah tugged at my sleeve. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. We continued down a narrow corridor, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. It was as though the very walls of Thornbrook Manor were trying to communicate with us. Suddenly, we reached a door that was slightly ajar. The room beyond was bathed in an eerie, greenish glow. We cautiously pushed the door open and stepped inside. My breath caught in my throat as I took in the scene. The room was filled with antique mirrors, their surfaces reflecting grotesque, distorted versions of ourselves. I saw myself with elongated limbs, Sarah with a twisted, ghastly grin, and our other friends with nightmarish distortions. A cold chill swept over me, and I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Panic set in as we pounded on the door, trying to force it open. The distorted reflections in the mirrors seemed to mock our terror. Hours passed, and we remained trapped in that room, our cries for help going unanswered. The whispers in the walls grew louder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. As night fell, the room took on a malevolent presence. Shadows danced in the corners, and the mirrors seemed to warp reality itself. I could no longer trust my own eyes, and I feared that the mirrors were slowly draining our sanity. Sarah began to sob uncontrollably, and one by one, our friends succumbed to madness. Their laughter turned to maniacal screams, and their reflections in the mirrors twisted into grotesque, nightmarish forms. I knew that I had to find a way out of this nightmare. With trembling hands, I searched the room for any means of escape. Finally, I spotted a small, ornate key on a dusty table. It looked like it might fit the door's lock. As I reached for the key, the room seemed to come alive. The mirrors shattered, releasing an otherworldly scream that echoed through the mansion. I grabbed the key and rushed to unlock the door. With a final, desperate turn, the door swung open, and I stumbled out into the corridor. The mansion had grown even darker, and the whispers had become a deafening cacophony. I raced through the winding halls, pursued by unseen forces that whispered my name. Finally, I burst through the front doors of Thornbrook Manor and into the moonlit night. I collapsed on the lawn, gasping for breath. The rest of my classmates were nowhere to be seen. To this day, I can still hear the whispers of Thornbrook Manor in my dreams. The horrors we encountered there haunt me, a constant reminder that some places should remain untouched, some doors should never be opened, and some field trips should never be taken. As I stepped into the dimly lit Costco, an eerie feeling washed over me. The cavernous aisles, usually bustling with shoppers, were now deserted. It was as though time had frozen, and I was the only one trapped in this retail nightmare. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered ominously, casting long, creeping shadows that seemed to dance with malicious intent. The hum of the refrigerators and freezers took on a haunting tone, echoing through the empty store like ghostly whispers. I moved cautiously down the first aisle, my footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. The shelves were stacked high with products, but they were not the familiar brands I had known. Instead, they bore strange and unsettling labels: cursed cereal, spectral spaghetti, and haunted hamburger helper. As I ventured deeper into the store, I noticed that the products themselves were bizarre. Cans of ectoplasmic energy drink seemed to vibrate with a malevolent energy. The bags of possessed popcorn rustled on their own, as though something sinister lurked within. A sudden, bone-chilling coldness enveloped me. I turned to see my breath hang in the air, forming ghostly shapes. The freezer section had come to life, and the glass doors swung open with a screech. Out tumbled frozen hands and faces, contorted in agony, pleading for release from their icy prison. I stumbled back, heart pounding, and fled deeper into the store. The aisles twisted and turned like a labyrinth, leading me further into this macabre nightmare.
Guys, thank you so much for
I heard
watching,
whispers,
and if you
faint
like
at
my horror
first,
sounds, please
but
make
growing
sure to
louder with each
subscribe if
step.
you want to.
It was as though the very walls were speaking to me, uttering dreadful secrets and cursed incantations. The meat section was a grisly spectacle. Slabs of demonic deli meats hung from hooks, oozing with malevolence. The butchers, knives levitated, circling ominously in the air, as though eager to carve into fresh flesh. I covered my mouth to stifle a scream as I saw the labels on the packages: haunted ham, poltergeist pork chops, and soul-stealing steak. Desperation consumed me as I continued my frantic journey through the haunted Costco. The darkness closed in around me, and the store itself seemed to shift and warp. It was as though the very walls were closing in, threatening to swallow me whole. I stumbled upon an abandoned shopping cart, and inside it was a tattered diary. I opened it, and the pages were filled with the frantic scribbles of someone who had clearly been here before me. They spoke of unholy rituals conducted in the store, of shoppers disappearing into the depths, never to return. With trembling hands, I read on, learning of the curse that had befallen this Costco. It had been built atop an ancient burial ground, and the spirits of the restless dead now roamed the aisles, seeking vengeance for their desecrated resting place. As I reached the back of the store, I found myself in a vast, cavernous chamber. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, disappearing into the darkness above. In the center of the room stood an altar, adorned with flickering candles and sinister symbols. The air grew thick with malevolent energy, and a presence materialized before me. It was a towering, spectral figure, its eyes burning with malevolence. It spoke in a voice that echoed through my very soul, recounting the horrors that had unfolded in this accursed place. I begged for mercy, for release from this nightmarish ordeal. But the spirit was unrelenting, condemning me to join the ranks of the lost souls trapped within the haunted aisles of Costco. And so, I remain here, a prisoner in this retail purgatory, condemned to wander the twisted aisles for all eternity. If you ever find yourself in a deserted Costco, heed my warning. Turn back, for the horrors that lurk within are beyond imagination, and escape is impossible. The chill ran down my spine as I entered the dilapidated movie house. It stood as a shadow of its former glory, a decaying relic of a bygone era. The once gleaming marquee now flickered weakly, spelling out cryptic words that sent shivers through me. I stepped inside, and the musty odor of old velvet seats and forgotten popcorn filled my nostrils. The dimly lit hallway stretched endlessly before me, its walls adorned with faded movie posters. It was as if time had stopped here, and the echoes of long-lost laughter and whispered secrets still hung in the air. I hesitated but knew I couldn't turn back. My curiosity had brought me here, to this forsaken place, where legends of a cursed movie played on a loop. People said that anyone who watched it was never the same again. I had scoffed at such tales, but now I wasn't so sure. I reached the ticket counter, and an ancient-looking attendant stared at me with empty eyes. He wore a tattered uniform, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Without a word, he handed me a ticket that bore no movie title, only a cryptic symbol that made my heart race. With trembling hands, I pushed through the heavy velvet curtains and entered the cavernous theater. It was almost empty, save for a few solitary figures scattered among the rows of seats. Their eyes were fixed on the screen, unblinking, as if trapped in some dreadful trance. I took my seat in the back, my heart pounding in my chest. The lights dimmed, and the projector flickered to life. The screen came alive with grainy images, and a haunting melody filled the air. I watched in morbid fascination as the cursed movie began. The story unfolded like a nightmare. A group of friends stumbled upon an abandoned mansion in the woods, their laughter turning to terror as they ventured deeper inside. Each room held unspeakable horrors, and as the friends dwindled in number, the mansion seemed to feed on their fear. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen, even as the scenes grew more grotesque and horrifying. The mansion's walls seemed to pulsate with a malevolent energy, and the shadows in the corners of the rooms whispered dreadful secrets. Time lost all meaning as I watched, my sanity slipping away with each passing minute. I felt as if I were trapped in the very movie I was watching, the line between reality and fiction blurring into a nightmarish haze. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the theater. I tore my gaze from the screen to see one of the other viewers writhing in agony, his eyes rolling back in his head as if possessed. The others around him remained motionless, their eyes fixed on the screen, oblivious to his torment. Panicked, I tried to stand, but an unseen force held me in my seat. My limbs felt heavy, and my voice was trapped in my throat. The cursed movie had me in its grip, and I was powerless to break free. As the movie reached its horrifying climax, I felt a searing pain in my mind. It was as if the very essence of my being was being torn apart, my thoughts and memories unraveling like a frayed thread. I screamed in agony, but my voice was drowned out by the nightmarish cacophony on the screen. And then, in an instant, it was over. The screen went dark, and the theater was silent. The other viewers remained motionless, their eyes vacant. I stumbled out of my seat, my head spinning, and made my way to the exit. As I stepped back into the dimly lit hallway, I felt a profound emptiness inside me, as if a part of my soul had been devoured by the cursed movie. I knew that I would never be the same again, that I had become another victim of the movie house's malevolent power. I stumbled out into the night, the memory of the cursed movie etched into my very being. The movie house stood silent and foreboding behind me, its secrets hidden in the darkness, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to be lured inside. The chill of December clung to the air as I ventured into the darkness of the woods that bordered our remote cabin. It was New Year's Eve, and the night held promises of festivities and merriment. My friends and I had planned a secluded celebration, far from the cacophony of the city. Little did I know that this would be a New Year's Eve I would never forget, for all the wrong reasons. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, we gathered around a bonfire, its flames flickering like ancient spirits. Laughter echoed, and the clinking of glasses filled the crisp night air. We raised our champagne flutes, toasting to the new year and the adventures it held. Yet, the night seemed to grow darker, the woods quieter. Unease settled in the pit of my stomach. It's probably just my imagination, I thought, shaking off the feeling. As the minutes dwindled away, strange occurrences began. The trees rustled, not from the wind, but as if they held secrets. Shadows danced between the trees, taking grotesque forms. My heart quickened, but I kept my fears to myself, not wanting to lose the festivities. Suddenly, the clock struck midnight. Tears erupted, but as the noise subsided, a blood-curdling scream tore through the night. We all turned to see Sarah, one of my closest friends, pointing into the darkness. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. We followed her trembling finger and saw it, a figure emerging from the woods. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs elongated, fingers like claws. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural, malevolent light. Panic surged through us as it advanced, slowly and deliberately. I grabbed Sarah's hand, and we all stumbled back, away from the creature. But it was relentless, closing the gap with each passing second. Our frantic steps brought us deeper into the woods, away from the safety of the cabin. The forest seemed to warp around us, the trees now towering and foreboding, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The creature was now almost upon us, and its presence was suffocating, a nightmare come to life. Desperation consumed us, and we split up, hoping to lose the creature in the labyrinth of trees. I ran blindly, my heart pounding, my breath dragging. Branches tore at my clothes and skin, but I dared not stop. The woods seemed to stretch on endlessly, and I felt utterly alone. But then, I heard the voices of my friends, faint but distinct. I followed the sound, hope surging within me. Soon, I stumbled upon them, huddled together behind a massive oak tree. The creature was still there, circling, its eyes never leaving us. We were trapped, our options dwindling. Panic set in as we realized that there was no escape, no help to call for, no one to save us. Time seemed to blur as we cowered in fear. Hours passed, but it felt like an eternity. The creature's presence was inescapable, an unrelenting nightmare. As dawn broke, the creature finally retreated into the depths of the woods, its malevolent eyes fading into the shadows. We were shaken and traumatized, our New Year's Eve celebration reduced to a harrowing fight for survival. We stumbled back to the cabin, battered and bruised, vowing never to return to those woods. That New Year's Eve, we had encountered something beyond our comprehension, something that belonged to the darkest recesses of our nightmares. To this day, I cannot forget the horror of that night, the creature that stalked us in the woods, and the chilling realization that there are forces in this world far more terrifying than we can ever imagine. The rain poured relentlessly outside, hammering against my car's windshield as I navigated the winding, isolated roads. My name is Alex, and I was on a late-night pizza delivery for Tony's Pizzeria, a job I had taken to make ends meet during these tough times. This delivery was different, though. It was to a remote cabin nestled deep in the woods, and the call had come in with a strange, eerie tone. The address on the receipt led me to a road that seemed to go on forever. My GPS signal had vanished, leaving me alone in the dark with only the faint glow of my car's headlights to guide me. The woods loomed on either side, their twisted branches casting eerie shadows. A shiver ran down my spine as I recalled the warnings I had heard about strange happenings in this area. Finally, I reached the cabin. It was old and dilapidated, looking as if it had been abandoned for years. The porch light flickered ominously, casting unsettling shadows across the peeling paint. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts telling me to turn back, but the $100 tip promised for this delivery was too tempting to resist. I grabbed the pizza box and knocked on the creaky wooden door. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain. After what felt like an eternity, the door slowly creaked open, revealing a figure obscured by darkness. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. The figure stepped into the dim light, revealing a man in his 40s with disheveled hair and wild eyes.
Thank you so much for watching.
His pale,
And if
gaunt
you like
face
my
sent a
horror
chill
fans,
down my
please like
spine.
and subscribe.
He didn't say a word,
See you in the next
just
video.
reached
Bye.
out and took the pizza box from my trembling hands. As he handed me a crumpled $100 bill, his fingers brushed against mine, sending a shock of cold through my body. "Thanks," I managed to stammer, eager to get away from this unsettling place. I turned to leave, but before I could take a step, the man whispered, "Wait." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. He beckoned me closer, and against my better judgment, I approached him. He leaned in and spoke in a hushed, trembling voice. "You need to leave," he whispered urgently. "They're coming for you. Get out of here, now." My blood ran cold, and I backed away from the man, stumbling down the rickety porch steps. Without another word, I sprinted back to my car, not daring to look back. As I sped away, the image of the man's terrified face haunted me. I thought I had escaped, but the worst was yet to come. Just a few miles down the road, my car's engine sputtered and died. I was stranded in the middle of the woods, surrounded by darkness and pouring rain. Panic set in as I fumbled for my phone, only to find that I had no signal. I decided to walk back to civilization, but the forest seemed to close in around me, the trees growing denser and more ominous with every step. Strange sounds echoed through the darkness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Hours passed, and exhaustion took hold. Just as I was about to give up hope, I stumbled upon an old, decrepit cabin, much like the one I had delivered the pizza to earlier. Desperation forced me to knock on the door, and it creaked open just like before. Inside, the cabin was filled with flickering candlelight, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I called out, but there was no response. I cautiously stepped further inside, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw them. A group of people in tattered clothes, their eyes vacant, standing in a circle around a table. On that table lay the empty pizza box, and in its place was a grotesque sight. A heart, still beating, surrounded by strange symbols and candles. I stumbled backward, terror gripping me. My mind raced as I realized the horrifying truth. I had delivered the pizza to a cult, and they were performing some unspeakable ritual. Before I could react, the cultists turned toward me, their lifeless eyes locking onto mine. In unison, they chanted in a language I couldn't understand, and I felt an icy grip wrap around my soul. As I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by fear and despair, the cultists advanced on me, their intentions clear. I had walked into a nightmare, and there was no escape. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping on my window, a soft, soothing rhythm. But something about it felt eerie. The darkness outside was punctuated by flashes of lightning, casting eerie shadows across my room. A thunderstorm was brewing, and I could sense that this night would be different. I tried to shake off the unease that had settled over me and pulled the covers tighter around myself. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low, menacing growl that seemed to echo in my bones. I glanced at the clock. It was 3 a.m. The witching hour, they called it. As I lay there, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof and windows. The storm was moving closer, and the wind began to howl like a trapped animal. I shivered, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Something about this storm felt otherworldly, as if it carried with it a malevolent presence. My bedroom felt suffocating, so I decided to go downstairs to the living room. The darkness in the house was oppressive, and I fumbled for the light switch. When the room was bathed in a soft, warm glow, I sighed in relief. But my relief was short-lived. A sudden crash of thunder shook the house, causing the lights to flicker and then go out completely. I was plunged into darkness, and a sense of dread washed over me. I groped for my phone, hoping to use its flashlight, but it was dead. The storm outside intensified, the rain now coming down in torrents, and the wind howled even louder. I felt isolated and vulnerable in the pitch-black darkness. That's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. My heart raced as I strained my ears to listen. The footsteps drew closer, but I couldn't see a thing. The storm outside seemed to be in sync with the approaching menace, the lightning flashes revealing fleeting glimpses of a shadowy figure. I couldn't make out any details, just the silhouette of someone or something standing in the hallway. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I had no idea who or what was in my house, and the thunderstorm outside was a deafening cover for any noise I might make. The footsteps continued to draw closer, and I could hear a faint, guttural whispering. "Come with me," it hissed, a voice that sent shivers down my spine. "Come with me, and I will show you the true power of the storm." I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from the hallway. The presence drew nearer, and I could feel its malevolence, a palpable darkness that seemed to seep into the very air I breathed. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into the darkness. The footsteps faded, and I was left alone in the oppressive silence of the storm. I sat there, paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do next. Hours passed, or maybe it was just minutes. Time had lost all meaning. The storm outside continued to rage, but the presence in my house had disappeared. With trembling hands, I finally found the courage to move. I groped my way to the front door, desperate to escape the suffocating darkness of my own home. As I stepped outside, the rain drenched me, and the wind whipped through my clothes. But I didn't care. I needed to get away from that place. I ran down the street, my heart pounding in my chest, and didn't stop until I reached a neighbor's house. They let me in, concern etched on their faces as I tried to explain what had happened. But as I looked back at my own house through the rain-streaked window, I knew they didn't fully believe me. Who would? To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. Was it a trick of the mind brought on by the storm's intensity, or was there something truly malevolent lurking in the shadows? I may never know, but I'll never forget the terror I felt that night. The night the thunderstorm brought something far more sinister than lightning and rain. It was a frigid December night, and the soft glow of Christmas lights adorned the houses in our quaint little town. Children eagerly awaited the arrival of Santa Claus, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister lurked beneath the festive facade. I had just moved into a centuries-old house on the outskirts of town. Its eerie, dilapidated appearance sent shivers down my spine, but the price had been too tempting to resist. As Christmas approached, strange things began to happen. It started innocently enough: a creaking floorboard, a flickering light. I chalked it up to the house's age. One evening, while sipping hot cocoa by the fire, I heard faint, mournful carolers singing "Silent Night" outside my window. When I peered out, I saw nothing but darkness. Chills crept down my spine, and I shut the curtains tightly, convincing myself it was just my imagination. The following night, the singing grew louder, more desperate. I cautiously opened the door, and to my horror, a group of ghostly figures clad in tattered 19th century clothing stood before me. Their hollow eyes stared into my soul as they sang with a mournful intensity that sent fear coursing through my veins. I slammed the door shut, trembling. Desperate for answers, I delved into the town's history. The town's archives revealed a gruesome tale from the 1800s, a cult that worshipped an ancient deity, hoping to gain eternal life. On Christmas Eve, they would perform a ritual, sacrificing innocent souls to appease their malevolent god. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that my house had once belonged to the cult's leader, a man named Ezekiel. Panic set in as I realized that I had unwittingly moved into the epicenter of their dark activities. Christmas Eve arrived, and a blizzard blanketed the town in snow. I heard the carolers once more, their voices hauntingly beautiful and filled with despair. This time, I couldn't resist their pull, compelled by an otherworldly force. I followed the eerie melody through the snowy woods, each step deeper into the forest taking me farther from safety. The cultists emerged from the shadows, their faces twisted by madness, chanting in a language I couldn't comprehend. As I watched in horror, they brought forth a sacrificial victim, a young girl with terror in her eyes. In the center of a frozen clearing, they began the ritual, their movements synchronized with unnatural precision. The sky turned crimson as a monstrous figure emerged from the earth, towering over us all. Its grotesque form seemed to be a fusion of countless nightmares, and its presence filled me with unspeakable dread. The cultists chanted louder, their voices now a cacophony of madness. The abomination reached for the girl, and as its hideous hand closed around her, I snapped out of the trance. With every ounce of strength I had, I rushed forward, pulling the girl free. Chaos erupted as the cultists turned their malevolent gaze upon me. I fled through the snow-covered forest, their horrifying cries echoing behind me. The blizzard raged on, obscuring my path, but I pressed forward, determined to escape the clutches of this ancient evil. Miraculously, I found my way back to my house, locked the door, and barricaded myself in. The carolers' mournful song faded into the distance, leaving me trembling in the cold darkness. That night, I learned the true meaning of terror, and the horrors of that Christmas Eve would haunt my dreams forever. The house that had seemed like a bargain had become my prison, a constant reminder of the ancient evil that lurked beneath the surface of our festive holiday season. The first time I laid eyes on the apartment building, I knew something was off. It stood at the end of a long, dimly lit street, like a sentinel guarding a dark secret. The windows were shattered, and the paint peeled away in jagged strips, revealing the building's decaying facade. Despite its decrepit appearance, it was the only place I could afford, so I signed the lease and moved in. The first night was restless. I heard strange noises echoing through the empty corridors. Whispers, like faint, agonized cries, echoed in the darkness. I tried to dismiss them as the product of an overactive imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As days turned into weeks, the apartment revealed its true nature. It had a malevolent energy that seemed to seep into every corner. Shadows danced on the walls at night, casting eerie shapes that seemed to reach out for me. I would wake up to find my belongings rearranged, as though someone had been in my apartment while I slept. But the locks were intact, and there were no signs of forced entry. One evening, I ventured into the basement, hoping to find the source of the haunting whispers. The air grew colder as I descended the narrow, rickety stairs. The basement was a labyrinth of decaying boxes and forgotten relics. In the dim light, I saw something that made my heart stop. A dusty, old photograph of me, taken from my own living room. I had never taken such a photo, nor had anyone else been inside my apartment. Terrified, I raced back upstairs and tried to contact the building's landlord. But the phone lines were dead, and my attempts to reach out to the neighbors were met with silence. It was as if the world had forgotten about this forsaken place. Each night, the haunting grew worse. I would wake up to find scratches on my walls and blood-red symbols etched into the floor. Whispers turned into tortured screams, and I could no longer deny that something malevolent lurked within these walls. One night, as I lay paralyzed in my bed, I saw it, a shadowy figure, gaunt and twisted, hovering above me. Its eyes were hollow pits of darkness, and its bony fingers reached for my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. All I could do was stare into those soulless eyes as they drew closer. But then, a blinding light filled the room, and the figure dissipated like smoke. I gasped for air, drenched in sweat. It was a reprieve, but I knew it wouldn't last. Desperation drove me to research the history of the building. What I discovered was a tale of unspeakable horror. Decades ago, the apartment had been home to a notorious serial killer who had lured victims into his lair, where he tortured and murdered them. The building had been abandoned ever since, cursed by the malevolent spirits of those who had met their gruesome end within its walls. I had to find a way out, but every attempt to leave was met with failure. The doors wouldn't budge, and the windows were sealed shut. I was trapped in this nightmare, with no escape in sight. As the days turned into weeks, I became a hollow shell of my former self. The relentless torment had driven me to the brink of madness. I could no longer distinguish between reality and the horrors that lurked in the shadows. Then, one fateful night, as I lay in my bed, the walls themselves seemed to come alive. They pulsed with a malevolent energy, closing in on me. I screamed, but there was no one to hear. The room grew smaller and smaller, until it felt like a tomb closing in on me. And then, with a deafening crash, it all stopped. I found myself lying on the floor, gasping for breath. The walls had returned to their normal state, as though nothing had happened. I knew I couldn't endure this torment any longer. With renewed determination, I searched for a way to break the curse. I scoured old books and manuscripts, seeking a solution that might save me from this living nightmare. Finally, I discovered a ritual that could banish the malevolent spirits once and for all. It required a desperate act, one that would risk everything. But I had no other choice. With trembling hands, I gathered the necessary items and performed the ritual. The apartment shook with fury, and the shadows howled in protest. But as I chanted the final incantation, a blinding light erupted, purging the darkness from every corner. When the light subsided, I found myself standing in the empty, dilapidated apartment. But it was different, peaceful. The malevolent presence was gone. I left that place and never looked back, haunted by the horrors I had endured. The apartment building still stands, a decaying relic of its sinister past. I warn anyone who considers moving there. Beware the whispers, for they may be the last thing you ever hear. I found myself alone in the dimly lit hospital room, the sterile scent of disinfectant clinging to the air like a macabre perfume. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor beside the empty bed. I shivered, but it wasn't from the chill in the room. It was the palpable sense of dread that seemed to seep from the walls. I had come to visit my grandmother, who had been admitted a few days ago, but something felt off from the moment I stepped inside. The nurses had been unusually quiet, their eyes avoiding mine, as if they knew something they weren't telling me. As I stood by the window, staring out at the moonless night, a cold breeze swept through the room, making me shiver once more. I turned to check on my grandmother, but her bed was empty. Panic welled up inside me, and I rushed out into the corridor, calling for help. The hospital had transformed. The once bustling halls were now eerily silent, and the flickering fluorescent lights cast long, distorted shadows on the walls. I stumbled down the corridor, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. It was as if the entire hospital had been abandoned, and I was the only one left. I finally reached the nurse's station, but it was deserted. The computer screens displayed nothing but a blinking cursor, and the papers strewn about were covered in indecipherable scribbles. My heart pounded in my chest as I continued down the labyrinthine hallways, searching for any sign of life. Then, I heard it, a faint, ghostly whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "Help me." The voice seemed to come from all directions at once, and I couldn't tell if it was real or a product of my fraying sanity. I followed the haunting clue, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. I entered an abandoned operating room, the surgical lights overhead casting an eerie glow. On the cold, stainless steel table lay my grandmother, unconscious and pale. I rushed to her side, but when I touched her hand, it was icy cold, and her skin felt like parchment. I called out her name, but there was no response. Desperation consumed me as I searched for any signs of life. That's when I saw them. Figures in tattered hospital gowns, their faces obscured by shadows, standing at the edge of the room. They watched in eerie silence, their eyes devoid of any emotion. I backed away, my heart racing, but they advanced, slowly closing in on me. Panic gripped my chest as I realized these were not the living. These were the lost souls of the hospital, trapped in this nightmarish purgatory. With nowhere to run, I stumbled out of the room and continued down the never-ending corridor, the ghostly whispers growing louder and more desperate. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the flickering lights above cast twisted, contorted shapes on the floor. I turned a corner and found myself in a decrepit ward. The beds were empty, but the walls were lined with photographs of patients, their faces twisted in agony. Each photograph seemed to pulsate with an unnatural energy, and I knew that these were the souls of those who had suffered here. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the terror of it all. I had to escape this place, but the hospital had become a labyrinth, a trap from which there was no escape. The whispers grew louder, filling my mind with their anguished pleas. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, a blinding light erupted from the end of the corridor. I stumbled toward it, praying for salvation. As I drew closer, the light coalesced into a figure, a nurse, bathed in a soft, warm glow. "Come with me," she said, her voice soothing and familiar. She extended her hand, and I took it without hesitation. She led me out of the nightmarish hospital, and as we stepped into the light, I felt a rush of relief wash over me. But as I turned to look back one last time, the hospital had vanished, leaving only an empty, moonlit field in its wake. The nurse squeezed my hand, and with a gentle smile, she whispered, "You're safe now." I never did find my grandmother that night, and I'm not sure I ever will.
Hi
But
guys,
one
thank
thing
you
is
so much
certain,
for watching.
I'll never
And if
forget
you
the
like my
horrors
horror
that
sounds,
lurked
please
within the
make sure to
walls of
like
that
and
accursed
subscribe if you
hospital,
want to.
and the
See
chilling
you in the next video.
realization that
Bye.
some nightmares are all too real. The wind outside howled like a tormented spirit, rattling the old windows of our family cabin. I glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands creeping closer to midnight. Thanksgiving Day had taken a dark turn, one that would haunt me for the rest of my days. It all began with the invitation from my estranged uncle, Gabriel. He lived in a secluded cabin deep within the woods, far from the nearest town. My family hadn't seen him in years, and his sudden request for us to join him for Thanksgiving was strange, to say the least. But a sense of duty compelled us to accept. As we approached the cabin, the forest seemed to close in around us, the towering trees casting eerie shadows. Gabriel greeted us with a forced smile, his eyes holding a flicker of something sinister. His wife, Helen, remained hidden in the shadows, her presence unsettling. The evening began with an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the occasional clinking of cutlery against plates. The food was exquisite, but there was something off about it, a taste that was impossible to place. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach as I watched my family devour the meal. As the night deepened, Gabriel insisted we partake in a peculiar tradition. He produced a weathered book, bound in human skin, and began to chant in a language I couldn't comprehend. The candles in the room flickered, and a bone-chilling cold filled the air. Panic clawed at my chest, but I was paralyzed, unable to move or speak. Suddenly, the cabin was filled with ghostly apparitions, figures twisted and contorted in agony. They moaned and wailed, their eyes hollow voids of despair. My family members were no longer themselves. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly malevolence. Helen stepped forward, her voice dripping with malice as she recited an incantation that sent shivers down my spine. "Tonight, we offer our thanks to the ancient spirits," she hissed. "In return, they shall grant us power beyond your feeble human understanding." I watched in horror as my family members began to transform. Their bodies twisted and stretched, their bones snapping like dry twigs. Fur sprouted from their skin, and claws extended from their fingertips. They had become grotesque, nightmarish creatures, no longer recognizable as human. The creatures turned their attention to me, their eyes burning with hunger. Gabriel's voice echoed in my head, taunting me, telling me that I could join them, that I could have power beyond my wildest dreams. But I knew that to do so would mean surrendering my humanity. With every ounce of strength left in me, I broke free of the paralyzing spell that held me captive. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding as I fled into the forest, the wails of those abominations echoing in my ears. The woods were a labyrinth of darkness, the trees closing in around me as if they were living creatures with sinister intent. Branches grasped at me like skeletal fingers, and the wind whispered chilling threats. I knew I was being pursued, and I had no choice but to keep running. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Exhaustion gnawed at my bones, and my mind teetered on the brink of madness. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let them catch me. At last, I stumbled upon a clearing bathed in moonlight. In its center stood an ancient, gnarled tree with roots that seemed to reach into the very bowels of the earth. Desperation overcame me, and I collapsed at its base, gasping for breath. As the first rays of dawn broke, I heard the creatures approaching. Their twisted forms emerged from the darkness, their eyes fixed on me with hunger. But the tree seemed to come alive, its roots surging out of the ground to ensnare the abominations. I watched in awe as the creatures were pulled beneath the earth, their screams fading into the distance. The tree had saved me, but at what cost? I was alone in the woods, forever scarred by the horrors of that Thanksgiving night. Now, as I sit in this lonely cabin, the wind howling outside, I can't help but wonder if the ancient spirits still lurk in the shadows, waiting for their next victim. And I can't shake the feeling that, someday, they'll come for me, too. I cautiously entered the sprawling shopping mall, the fluorescent lights overhead casting eerie shadows on the hordes of shoppers. It was Black Friday, a day infamous for its chaos and consumer madness. I had foolishly decided to brave the crowds in search of a discounted TV. As I weaved through the labyrinthine aisles, the sense of foreboding grew with every step. People moved like zombies, their eyes fixed on sale signs, their faces devoid of emotion. It was as if consumerism had stripped them of their humanity. The store was a battlefield. Shelves were ransacked, and merchandise lay scattered like casualties. Shoppers argued and pushed, their voices rising in a discordant symphony of greed. I tried to keep my composure, reminding myself that I needed the TV. In the electronics section, I finally found the TV I wanted, nestled between two towering stacks of other flat screens. I grabbed it and clutched it to my chest, like a lifeline in this sea of madness. But as I turned to make my escape, I froze. A figure stood at the end of the aisle, obscured by the flickering fluorescent lights. It was a man, or at least it had once been. His face was pallid, his eyes empty voids. He wore a tattered suit, and his fingers ended in long, gnarled claws. He was holding a shopping cart, but it was filled not with merchandise, but with human limbs. I gasped, and the sound seemed to awaken him from his trance. He turned his hollow gaze towards me, and a malicious grin spread across his face. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, clutching the TV tighter. I had to get out of here. I stumbled through the chaos, the man with the cart following me, his laughter echoing in my ears. The mall itself seemed to conspire against me, its layout shifting and changing, leading me deeper into its heart. I was trapped in a maze of consumerism, pursued by a creature born of greed. As I turned another corner, I found myself in a different world altogether. The mall had transformed into a nightmarish realm. The walls were adorned with grotesque paintings of shoppers devouring each other, and the floor was slick with a viscous, black liquid. The man with the cart was gone, but I was not alone. Monstrous creatures roamed the aisles, their bodies twisted and distorted, their eyes hungry for something more than merchandise. They reached out to me with twisted limbs, their voices a cacophony of despair and longing. I ran, driven by a primal fear I had never known before. Finally, I reached the mall's exit, but it offered no escape. Instead, it led to a cavernous abyss. I stood on the precipice, staring into the darkness below. I had a choice to make: face the horrors of the mall or leap into the unknown. In that moment, I heard a voice behind me. It was soft, almost a whisper, but it cut through the chaos like a knife. "Give me the TV," it said. I turned to see a woman standing there, her eyes filled with a terrible hunger. She extended her hand towards me, and I knew that she was not asking. She was demanding. I hesitated for only a second before I let go of the TV, watching it tumble into the abyss. The woman snatched it out of the air and disappeared into the darkness. With a sense of dread, I turned and faced the horrors of the mall once more. But this time, they seemed to lose interest in me. They had what they wanted: the TV, the symbol of consumerism. I made my way back through the shifting aisles, the madness gradually receding. As I stepped out of the mall, I looked back one last time, knowing that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. Black Friday had become a nightmare, a day when the hunger for material possessions had unleashed unspeakable horrors. And as I walked away from that accursed place, I couldn't help but wonder if the real monsters were not the creatures in the mall, but the shoppers themselves, driven to madness by their insatiable desires. The American Dream Mall had always fascinated me. Its massive size, gleaming facade, and promise of endless entertainment drew me in like a moth to a flame. Little did I know that my curiosity would lead me down a dark and terrifying path. One chilly autumn evening, I decided to explore the mall after hours. The security guard, an elderly man named Frank, had always warned me about the mall's eerie reputation after dark. "Stay away from the mall at night, kid," he'd say with a shaky voice. But I couldn't resist the temptation any longer. As I entered the mall, the familiar buzz of shoppers and the cheerful music that filled the air during the day was replaced by an unsettling silence. The dimly lit corridors stretched out endlessly before me, and I could feel the weight of the place bearing down on my shoulders. My footsteps echoed through the empty halls as I wandered deeper into the mall. The stores, which were bustling with activity just hours ago, now stood abandoned. Mannequins, frozen in poses, seemed to watch me with lifeless eyes as I passed by. The escalators, once teeming with families, lay dormant and creaked ominously in the stillness. My heart pounded as I reached the amusement park section of the mall. The Ferris wheel, which usually lit up the night sky with a kaleidoscope of colors, was now a looming shadow against the moonlit sky. The carousel spun slowly, and the horses' painted faces twisted into grotesque grins in the pale moonlight. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed.
Hi guys,
Whispers,
thank you so much for watching.
too faint to make out,
If you like my
filled the
videos,
air around me.
make sure to like and subscribe.
I quickened my pace, but the mall seemed to stretch on endlessly, leading me in circles. Panic set in as I realized I was lost in this labyrinthine nightmare. Suddenly, I heard a child's laughter echoing through the darkness. It was impossible, I thought. There was no one else in the mall. The laughter grew louder and more sinister, and I followed it, unable to resist its call. It led me to the entrance of an abandoned toy store. I pushed open the creaking door, and what I saw inside froze my blood. The shelves were lined with dolls, their eyes wide and unblinking. They whispered in hushed tones, their voices overlapping in a chilling cacophony. "Play with us," they pleaded in eerie unison. Terrified, I stumbled back and slammed the door shut. The laughter continued to follow me, growing louder and more manic with each step. It was as though the very walls of the mall were closing in on me. In a desperate bid to escape, I made my way to the mall's massive indoor water park. The pools, once filled with happy families, were now dark and foreboding. I waded into the water, hoping to find a way out through the labyrinthine slides. As I slid down one of the twisting tunnels, the world around me seemed to warp and shift. I emerged into a nightmarish version of the water park, where grotesque creatures with twisted faces and elongated limbs lurked in the shadows. I screamed as they closed in, their eerie laughter joining the chorus of voices that haunted me. But just as they were about to reach me, I was jolted awake, drenched in sweat, in my own bed. It had all been a nightmare, a horrifying glimpse into the American Dream Mall's dark side. But as I lay there, trying to calm my racing heart, I couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to the stories of the mall's supernatural horrors. One thing was certain, I would never set foot in that place after dark again. Frank's warning had been more than justified, and I had no desire to become another victim of the mall's terrifying secrets. The rain fell relentlessly against the window panes, a constant drumming that echoed through the empty house. I had been left home alone for the weekend, as my parents had gone on a sudden business trip. The flickering candlelight provided the only source of comfort in the dimly lit living room. As I settled into the couch, wrapped in a blanket, a strange feeling of unease washed over me. It was a feeling I couldn't quite shake, like I was being watched. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination running wild in the stormy night, but it persisted, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. The wind howled outside, creating eerie melodies that seemed to resonate with the fear inside me. I decided to distract myself with a book, but every creak and groan of the old house made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was lurking in the shadows. After what felt like hours, I mustered the courage to venture upstairs to my bedroom. The staircase stretched before me, and with each step, the oppressive silence of the house became more pronounced. The darkness upstairs was impenetrable, and the thought of entering my room was paralyzing. I forced myself to enter, turned on the dim bedside lamp, and climbed into bed. Just as I began to convince myself that I was overreacting, I heard it, a faint whisper, like a soft breeze carrying words I couldn't quite make out. Panic set in as I strained to listen. "Stay. Stay." The voice was hushed and eerie, seemingly coming from the closet. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I had to investigate. I couldn't ignore this. I slowly approached the closet, the door creaking ominously as I pulled it open. There, in the dim light, I saw a figure huddled in the corner. It was a girl, pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and vacant. She was dressed in tattered clothes, as if she had been trapped in that closet for ages. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I stumbled back in terror, my mind racing with questions. Who was she? How had she ended up in my closet? Before I could muster the courage to respond, the lights flickered and went out. I was plunged into darkness, with only the sound of the girl's haunting whispers to guide me. "Stay. Don't leave me here." I fumbled for my phone, using its feeble flashlight to illuminate the room. But the girl was gone, and the closet was empty. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that she had disappeared into thin air. With trembling hands, I rushed downstairs to the living room, desperate to escape the malevolent presence that now seemed to engulf the entire house. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. The living room was no longer empty. It was filled with shadowy figures, their forms shifting and contorting in the dim light. They whispered in unison, their voices a chilling chorus. "Stay. "Stay with us." I couldn't move. I was trapped, surrounded by these spectral beings that seemed to feed on my fear. The candle on the coffee table flickered and died, plunging the room into total darkness. I was enveloped by their whispers, their icy fingers brushing against my skin. In that moment of sheer terror, I knew I had to do something. I groped blindly for the front door, praying that it would lead me to safety. As I reached for the doorknob, a bony hand grabbed my wrist, its grip like a vice. "Stay with us forever," I screamed and wrenched my arm free, flinging the door open and stumbling outside. The rain drenched me, but I didn't care. I ran as far as my legs could carry me, not looking back until I reached a neighbor's house. The police were called, and they searched my home thoroughly, but they found nothing. No spectral figures, no haunted whispers, nothing out of the ordinary. They chalked it up to my imagination, but I knew what I had experienced was real. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. All I know is that I will never forget those chilling whispers and the feeling of being watched by something otherworldly. And though I left that house, a part of me will forever remain trapped inside, haunted by the memory of that terrifying night when I was home alone.